As the EU gathers to consider whether or not to extend sanctions on Russia over its military aggression in Ukraine, Moscow is busy trying to get member states back on its side. It's telling them that in the face of the threat from Islamic State, now is the time to put aside differences for the sake of common security. But, says Tom Burridge, writing for the BBC, it looks like the EU is standing by Kyiv, at least for now. We'll look at his article today here on the Press Review. He writes, since IS claimed responsibility for the Paris terror attacks and the downing of a Russian airliner over Sinai, EU officials say Moscow has been working diligently to try to convince individual member states that now is the time to engage with Russia and end its isolation linked to the war over eastern Ukraine. The official collective position in Brussels, though, is that there will be no trade-off of issues. The bloc will work hard to engage Russia on many issues without giving up its, quote, very clear position on Ukraine. But Burridge suggests that the current unity over Ukraine is getting ever more stretched and, if we look a little ways down the line, could come apart. He says EU sanctions on Moscow are due to be renewed this month for another 6 months, and few in Brussels think that getting the necessary European consensus will be a problem. However, wind the clock on a further 6 months when the sanctions will be up for renewal again, and it is harder to predict what the thinking of European governments will be. Fueling the uncertainty is the fact that Europe has invested a huge amount in Ukraine, and not just financially. The principles of national sovereignty and preservation of borders are at stake, but that is not all. Burridge writes, Europe's so far unflinching stance over Ukraine and the alleged involvement of Russia in the war there is partly explained by a principled protection of Ukraine's sovereignty. The unprecedented EU investment in the country, both in financial and political terms, means Europe's reputation is at stake. However, the EU's support is conditional. Ukraine has to deliver its side of the deal. And delivering for Ukraine means things like overhauling the judiciary and cutting down on corruption. The country hasn't delivered enough on those pledges since the pro-EU revolution of 2014. But there are some incentives from the EU side. As Burridge tells us, there are some carrots as well as sticks. The European Commission is expected to give the green light for Ukraine to be added to the list of countries whose citizens enjoy visa-free travel within the EU. And a new free trade agreement between the EU and Ukraine will take effect in January. All eyes will be on whether this potentially landmark moment in EU-Ukrainian relations will see another escalation of violence. So, as we come up to the end of the year, it looks like it could be crunch time for Ukraine and its European path. Visa-free travel and a free trade deal, these two things could make the country closely resemble European Union member states, even if it may be some time yet before that title can be officially applied. That's all we have time for today. Join us again tomorrow for another press review. In Kyiv, this is Ukraine Today.